Hi, this is Christine with Zeidman Development. Today I'd like to walk you through a process of updating student and family information in the Razor's Edge using our paid destinations for individual relationship, organization relationship, and education relationship. This sample is working from the idea that there's a student database that contains a student ID number as well as student-related data, including the student's parent and the student's parent's employer. Let's go ahead and take a look at our sample data, and then I'll show you our template. You can see that this sample data is pretty simple, and there's probably a lot more options that you would have in your student information system. But this does give you a basis of where to start and how you can use Importacular to put this kind of information into the Razor's Edge. You can see that we have student-related information, including first, last name, the student ID from the student information system, a birth date, a gender, a grade level, a graduation year, school, area of study, parent, first name, last name, and employer, and as well as an address that can be shared between both the parent and the student. So using this information, let's take a look at the template that I've built in Importacular so that you can see how all of this would flow into Razor's Edge to create a student constituent account, a parent constituent account, a relationship between the student and the parent, a relationship between the parent and their employer, as well as an education relationship on the student's record. You can see on the first tab of my template that I've mapped a couple of different areas for constituent. I have a student as a constituent. I also have a constituent of a parent. That is a lighter gray because that person was created using the Individuals tab, but you can see it here because it's also going to create a constituent within Razor's Edge. Let's go ahead and start with our student mapping because if we were creating this template from scratch, that's where we would start from the beginning. You can see that this mapping looks very similar to what you would find on the Bio 1 tab. We have things for birth date, first name, last name, ID, gender, and we also have a few other things that would not be on Bio 1, such as addressee and salutation further down. You can see that I have mapped several fields from the source data that I showed you in the beginning. I've used the student first name to create the first name on this record. I've used the gender to fill in the gender on this record, and I've used the student last name to fill in the last name on this record. You can see on student first and last name, I've applied some settings. Let's take a look at what those are. On this setting, I have chosen to only update new constituent records because I believe that the last names I already have in Razor's Edge are probably more accurate than the information in my student information systems. You can make either choice, but that is the one that's best for my data. I've also chosen to mark everything in this proper case. I know that people have tended to type in my data field with all caps or all lowercase, and I don't want to populate my name fields that way. So I've chosen proper case as a way to correct that. Finally, even though we're not using title in our addressee and salutation at this time, I've decided to fill in the field of title just in case my next development director wants to use it. But my data file didn't have title as a field, so instead I've mapped to the source field name of gender, and I've created a data transformation that allows me to transform the field source of male into the title Mr. and the source of female into the title of Ms. You could do this differently with other titles and other genders if you needed to, but for what I'm doing, this works. Let's close this mapping and look at the other mappings that are set up to work with the student constituent account. So next, I've set up a student constituent code. You can see I've given a mapping name that says student constituent code, and that's because I don't want to confuse myself with the student constituent code versus the parent constituent code. So my name here is student constituent code, and it is linked with my student account, not my parent account. I've also chosen the appropriate code there. I've also created a student ID that's a constituent alias. Again, you can see I've named it student ID, I've linked it to the student, and I've mapped it here. My alias type is student ID, and my alias key name, or in some versions of Razor's Edge, you may just call this an alias, is the student ID. I've also created an additional addressee and salutation for my student accounts. so that later when they graduate, we have their alumni mailing information correctly in Razor's Edge. I've chosen the type and I've chosen the formula. I didn't have that in my source field, but I was able to choose default values that'll map directly into Razor's Edge. I've also added a solicit code to my students because I don't want to ask them for money until they've graduated. So, again, I've named this with student in the title so that I can find it easily, and I've made sure that it's linked with my student, and I've added that student solicit code. You can also see that I have a parent constituent code. This will link with our parent mapping that has been created on the individual relationship record. But you can see here the mapping name I typed in parent, and it's linked to that parent mapping. So when this creates a new parent constituent, it will give that parent record the constituent code of parent and not the constituent code of student. Next, let's take a quick look at our address. You can see here, again, I have two mappings, one for student and one for parents. These are going to be nearly identical. The main change is that one is linked with student and the other is linked with parent. Make sure you check both of these if you're doing an import that involves a relationship with another constituent so that you link addresses and everything correctly to the constituent that you want it to be on. I had found that putting the constituent name in the mapping does tend to help me keep that straight. Next, let's take a look at what it looks like to map the parent as a constituent relationship to the student. So what I've done is I've gone in and I've created a constituent relationship between the parent and the student instead of a non-constituent relationship. You can see here I've mapped the parent first name and the parent last name instead of the student first name and last name. I've also added an addressee and a salutation, and I've selected a relationship and a reciprocal. You would want to do those in addition to all of the Bio 1 fields that you can so that you can track what this relationship is in the Razor's Edge. Just so you can see the difference, if I click on Add New Relationship, that's where you would choose if you pick a constituent or a non-constituent. You also have the option to add a relationship attribute to the individual relationship. So if you are using individual relationship attributes, this may be an option to help you track your information in the Razor's Edge. Just as a note, you do need to create this parent relationship before you're going to be able to create the parent address or the parent constituent code. You also need to create the parent relationship before you can create the relationship between the parent to the employer. So to do this, again, I came in and I chose whether or not I wanted to make it a constituent or a non-constituent, and then I filled in my data. I have added the parent employer as the organization name. I decided to add a note so that I could see that it was from student registration. You may have more information that you're able to fill in based on the information in your file or information that you can use for default values, but for what I have in this sample, this is what I was able to use. Again, just like with the individual relationship attributes, you also have the option to add an organization relationship attribute. This attribute, just like the individual relationship attribute, only lives on the relationship. It will not be on a constituent attribute tab. Next, let's take a look at the education relationship tab. Let's start with our education mapping. You can see here that I have set the default value that this is the primary alumni relationship on each of these records. If you are using the education or the alumni module in Razor's Edge to track your education relationships, using this checkbox will allow you to track your school's alumni and their giving by class year and things like that. So I'm defaulting to that value for my purposes. I've also mapped their graduation year to their class of. I'm using today's date as their date entered. I've also defaulted my school name because in my data file, my school name was elementary, middle, and high, and that's not going to help me long term. I've also set their status as current student. I've set an area of study as an education attribute. You can see that the category is area of study. The date, again, was today's date. And I've set the description to pull from my source field of area of study. Finally, I've also set up a major so that I can track their area of study in that way as well. This is the end of our template, so let's go ahead and save and close. And let's walk through the process of how we would import this data into the Razor's Edge. I am going to create a Razor's Edge query of new and updated constituents so that we can go back and look at what we've done after we've processed our data. We can see that Importacular has identified some of these constituents as being updates and some of them as being creates. You can see that Simon has the same address and he's been linked to update. Let's go ahead and look at one other. Colton has the same address and the same name, and he's also been set to update. If we thought maybe there was a Holly in our system and we weren't sure why she wasn't showing up, we can always come down and click Find Matched Constituents and type into search and see if Holly is in fact in Razor's Edge. We don't have anyone with that name, so let's keep her at Create. We also have the option to review updates and creates that are happening with our relationships. So if we look at the individual tab, we can see that Simon already has a relationship with Christine. And this is going to update that relationship. You can see the link down at the bottom. But Holly does not have a relationship already with Scott. So this is going to create that relationship in this process of importing. We can also see what's happening with our organization relationships by clicking on that tab, as well as with our education relationships from that tab. You do have some options. If you need to change a record, you can actually type in that field to do so. I've reviewed all of my data, and this looks good to me, so I'm going to validate and see if there are any exceptions that come up. Okay, we've validated and we've had no exceptions. We can see that we have created 5 new records on the Razor's Edge. We have updated 5 records on the Razor's Edge, and we do have access to look at our control report here. You can see our properties, our exceptions, which are none, and our template. Let's close this, let's import our data, and then let's take a look at the records in Razor's Edge so you can see how everything came through. Okay, let's close this and let's go to our query and see what we have. So I've closed out of Importacular and I've opened my query. I've given the output of name and I'm going to click to my results tab. And you can see here that we have created several different names, more so than just the students that we saw in our original file. You can see that we have some businesses such as the Sangamon Veterinary Clinic, as well as we have some children and their parents. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at Holly Rosebush. When we open Holly's account, which was a new account created in the Razor's Edge, we can see that Holly now has the student constituent code. Holly has the solicit code of do not solicit. She has her birthday. She has her title. She has an address. She also has an additional addressee salutation for her alumni mailings for when she graduates. And she has a relationship with her father and with her school. If we click on her father's account, we can see that he also has a relationship with Holly as well as a relationship with his employer. So everything that we needed to put through into this database has gone through correctly. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this has been helpful for you to see how you could use Importacular to update student and their parent relationships with each other, as well as with the parent-employer and the student's relationship with the school, all in one import using Importacular. Have a great day!